My name is Lucas, and I'm going to share an experience that haunts me to this day. When I was 16, my dad and I decided to go on a camping trip to a remote location. My dad had always been a nature lover and wanted to share this passion with me. We found an isolated area he had recently discovered. It was miles away from any signs of civilization, promising a true immersion in the wilderness. I remember the excitement I felt as we packed our things and set off, the truck filled with equipment and supplies. The road to the location was narrow and winding, surrounded by dense trees that seemed to close in on us. We arrived at our destination at dusk and quickly set up camp near a small stream. The tranquility of the place was almost surreal. The only sounds were the murmur of the running water and the songs of birds. My dad and I chatted excitedly about the trails we would explore and the adventures that awaited us. But as night fell, an unsettling feeling began to creep over me. Something about that place felt strange. On the first night, everything seemed normal. We had dinner by the firelight, telling stories and laughing together. The deep darkness of the forest around us created an intimate yet somewhat eerie atmosphere. The stars shone brightly in the sky, and for a moment, I felt completely at peace. However, as the night wore on, I started to notice sounds I couldn't identify. A light rustling in the leaves, an occasional branch snapping, small noises that seemed to echo in the silence. My dad noticed my unease and tried to reassure me, saying it was just nocturnal animals. But there was something about the interrupted silence that made me uncomfortable. We decided to retire to the tent. My dad fell asleep quickly, but I remained awake, listening intently to every sound. Around midnight, I heard something that made my heart race. It was a scream, not a human scream, but something primal, deep, that seemed to reverberate in my soul. I was paralyzed with fear, unsure whether to wake my dad or try to ignore it. But deep down, I knew that night was far from normal. The screams became more frequent and intense. Every time they echoed through the forest, my body tensed with fear. I woke my dad, who initially tried to calm my fears, but soon heard the screams himself. His expression changed instantly from calm to deep concern. The screams didn't sound natural. They were loud, distressing, full of despair. "Stay here, Lucas," my dad said, grabbing a flashlight and a machete. I protested, saying we shouldn't separate, but he insisted I stay in the tent. He went in the direction of the screams, leaving me alone in the tent with the flashlight off to avoid attracting attention. Every minute felt like an eternity. The screams continued, now accompanied by the sound of breaking branches and what sounded like a struggle. I could feel my heart beating uncontrollably, my mind racing with images of what might be happening out there. Finally, the screams stopped, leaving an even more terrifying silence. When my dad returned, he was pale and out of breath. "We need to leave now," he said with a trembling voice. "There's no time to explain." My dad came back to the tent with an expression I'll never forget, a mix of absolute terror and urgency. His skin was pale, and his wide eyes showed a fear I had never seen before. "Lucas, pack your things now," he said in an urgent whisper. We started dismantling the camp hastily, my mind full of questions, but the only clear thing was the need to get out of there as quickly as possible. There was no time to think, only to act. As we packed everything clumsily and quickly, I tried to get some explanation from my dad, but he just shook his head, murmuring, "Not now, not now." His urgency was palpable, and that scared me even more. We got into the truck, and my dad drove with a fierce determination, almost as if we were fleeing from something invisible. The entire drive back, he kept his eyes fixed on the road, avoiding any conversation about what he had seen or heard. When we finally got home, it was already dawn. We entered silently, and my dad locked all the doors and windows, something he never did. I went to my room, but sleep didn't come. My mind was filled with images and sounds from that night. The next morning, my dad acted as if nothing had happened. I tried several times to approach him about what he saw or heard in the forest, but he always changed the subject or fell silent with a distant look. As time passed, I realized that the event had deeply affected us. My dad, once so passionate about camping and nature, never mentioned camping again. He became more reserved, always on alert. as if expecting something to come back and haunt us. That scream, that primal and disturbing sound, remained etched in my mind. To this day, I never discovered what really happened that night. The mystery and fear remain, haunting my thoughts, a constant shadow of what could be out there in the darkness. My name is Jake, and I'm going to share an experience that still haunts my friends and me. During our college years, my friends, Sarah, Tom, and I, decided to take a break from our hectic schedules and go camping near a remote river. We needed to relax and reconnect with nature. The spot we chose was perfect, isolated, surrounded by a dense forest, and bordered by a beautiful river with crystal clear water where we could swim and fish. We arrived at our destination at dusk as the sun was setting and casting a golden glow over the landscape. The scene was stunning, with the sun reflecting on the river and the forest enveloping us in tranquility. We quickly set up our tents and lit a campfire to cook dinner. Sitting around the fire, we chatted, laughed, and reminisced about college stories, excited about spending a few days relaxing and exploring nature. It seemed like it would be a perfect weekend until something strange began to happen. As we were getting ready to sleep, Sarah noticed something odd near the tree line. "Hey, do you guys see that?" she whispered, pointing into the darkness. We looked in the direction she indicated and saw silhouettes of people standing among the trees watching our campsite. The firelight wasn't enough to reveal details, but we could see several people standing still and silent. At first, we tried to ignore them, thinking they were just curious fellow campers. But as the night went on, their presence became more unsettling. They didn't approach or make any noise, just stood there, watching. A sense of unease began to grow among us. Tom suggested we should go talk to them, but Sarah and I disagreed, feeling that something was wrong. We decided to go into the tents and try to sleep, hoping the strangers would leave. However, fear and restlessness kept us all from truly resting. Around midnight, I woke up to the sound of light footsteps around our campsite. My heart raced, and I peeked through the tent opening. I saw shadows moving, closer than before. It was as if they were surrounding us, studying our every move. I whispered to Tom and Sarah, who were also awake and equally scared. We decided we needed to do something. Tom, trying to stay calm, grabbed a flashlight and slowly stepped out of the tent. The flashlight's beam illuminated shadowy faces and strange eyes reflecting the light back at us. They were people, but something was deeply wrong with them. Their eyes seemed empty, as if they were in a trance. "What do you want?" Tom shouted, but there was no response, just the sound of leaves rustling and branches snapping. We felt they were trying to intimidate us, like predators playing with their prey. Fear took over us. We knew we couldn't stay there. Without waiting any longer, we began to hastily pack up our camp. The shadowy figures didn't attack us, but continued to watch in silence, which was even more terrifying. Every minute felt like an eternity as we packed our things, always keeping an eye on the strangers who were so close. Their silence was deafening, heightening our anxiety. When we finally finished, we began the walk back to the car, the flashlight's beam trembling in our hands. The figures followed us, keeping a constant distance. We could feel their eyes on us, a chilling sensation that made every hair on our bodies stand on end. We walked as fast as we could, not running to avoid showing panic, but the fear was palpable. Sarah was trembling. Tom looked back at every step, and I could only think about getting out of there as quickly as possible. Finally, we saw our car in the makeshift parking area at the trailhead. We hurried inside, locking the doors immediately. Tom started the engine and sped away, leaving the forest as fast as the car would allow. I looked in the rearview mirror and saw the figures standing at the edge of the road, watching us disappear into the night. The silence inside the car was heavy, all of us trying to process what had just happened. No one spoke a word on the way back to the city. The relief of being away from those empty eyes was immense, but the fear remained. When we finally got home, it was already early morning. We entered quietly, and my dad locked all the doors and windows, something he never did. I went to my room, but sleep didn't come. My mind was filled with images and sounds from that night. The next morning, my dad acted as if nothing had happened. I tried several times to approach him about what he saw or heard in the forest, but he always changed the subject or fell silent with a distant look. As time passed, I realized that the event had deeply affected us. My dad, once so passionate about camping and nature, never mentioned camping again. He became more reserved, always on alert, as if expecting something to come back and haunt us. That scream, that primal and disturbing sound, remained etched in my mind. To this day, I never discovered what really happened that night. The mystery and fear remain, haunting my thoughts, a constant shadow of what could be out there in the darkness. In the following days, we tried to talk about the experience, but it seemed that words were never enough to describe the terror we felt. Those empty eyes, the way they followed us without making a sound, all of it still haunts us today. We never found out who those people were or what they wanted, and maybe it's better that way. The memory of that night remains vivid in our minds, a constant reminder that there are things in the depths of the forest that we perhaps... My name is Michael, and I have always been passionate about camping. I love the feeling of freedom and peace that nature provides, especially when I am alone. I decided to go on a solo camping trip to a familiar spot near a lake. I had visited that place many times and always found it perfect for disconnecting and recharging. I arrived at the location in the late afternoon. The sun was beginning to set, casting golden reflections on the tranquil surface of the lake. I set up my tent near the shore, where the view was spectacular. After organizing my things, I sat by the campfire I had lit, enjoying the silence broken only by the sound of the leaves rustling in the breeze and the occasional rustle of nocturnal animals. I felt a deep peace, happy to have taken some time for myself. While I was having dinner, I began to notice something strange. Across the lake, I glimpsed a human figure. Another camper, I thought. It wasn't common to find other people in this isolated location, but it wasn't impossible. However, something about the way he stood, looking in my direction, made me uncomfortable. I tried to ignore it, thinking he was also enjoying the view, but the feeling of being watched began to bother me more and more. The man across the lake continued to watch me. Even when I pretended not to notice, I could feel his eyes fixed on me. Night fell, and the only illumination came from my campfire and the moonlight reflected on the water. The silence, which had been comforting before, now felt heavy and oppressive. I kept trying to ignore the stranger, but he made no attempt to hide his watchfulness. His behavior was unusual and unsettling. After finishing my dinner, I decided to go into the tent and try to sleep. Maybe it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. But even inside the tent, I felt exposed. The thought of the man across the lake, standing and watching me, wouldn't leave my mind. I picked up my flashlight and discreetly looked again to where he was. There he was, still standing, motionless, like a statue. I tried to relax, telling myself that he was probably just another lonely camper, curious to see someone in the same spot. But as time passed, his behavior became increasingly disturbing. He didn't move, didn't make a sound, just watched. The uneasiness inside me grew, and the desire to leave started to take over my thoughts. I decided I couldn't just ignore this strange behavior. I resolved to leave the tent and keep the fire going for a while longer. Maybe this would show the man that I was aware and make him go away. I sat by the fire with the flashlight in one hand and a camping knife in the other. The night was cold, but the warmth of the fire helped keep my mind focused. As the minutes turned into hours, my anxiety only increased. The man was still there, motionless, watching. Sometimes it seemed like I could see a strange glint in his eyes, as if he were waiting for something. I decided to stay awake all night. If he tried anything, I would be prepared. My mind was racing, imagining all possible scenarios. The night seemed endless. Every small sound in the forest made me jump. The rustling of leaves, the snapping of a branch, the distant sound of an animal. Everything seemed amplified by my heightened state of alertness. I began to question if it had been a good idea to come alone. What had once been an escape for peace had now turned into a nightmare of anxiety. I kept the fire burning, feeding the flames whenever they began to die down. as if the fire could protect me from the man watching me. Time passed slowly as I remained vigilant, my eyes fixed on the man across the lake. Occasionally, he would move slightly, as if changing position, but he never left his spot. The tension in the air was palpable, and every minute felt like an eternity. I was exhausted, but I couldn't allow myself to sleep. The idea of closing my eyes while that stranger continued to watch was unbearable. Around 3 in the morning, I noticed a different movement. The man started to walk slowly in my direction, following the edge of the lake. My heart raced. I gripped the knife tighter, prepared for anything. But as he got closer, he stopped again, at a safe distance, but still close enough for me to see his face in the moonlight. He was pale, with fixed, expressionless eyes, as if he wasn't really there. I watched, my whole body tense, waiting for him to do something. But he just stood there as before, watching. I decided I couldn't bear it any longer. As soon as the first rays of sunlight began to appear on the horizon, I started to dismantle my camp. I did it as quietly as possible, but with desperate haste. I needed to get out of there before something worse happened. With the dawn light, I finished packing my things. The man was still standing, now farther away, but still visible. Every movement I made was followed by his vigilant eyes. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm as I finished taking down the tent and putting out the fire. The sound of birds beginning to sing brought a bit of relief, but not enough to dispel the sense of danger. I walked quickly toward my car, always looking back to make sure the man wasn't following me. The feeling of being watched was overwhelming, but with each step I took away from the lake, I felt a bit safer. When I finally reached my car, I threw my things into the back seat and got in, locking the doors immediately. I started the engine and drove away as fast as possible. On the way back home, the road seemed longer than usual. Fear and exhaustion were taking over me. My eyes were heavy, and the tension from the past night was starting to dominate me. As I was about to leave the dirt road for the main road, a figure suddenly appeared in front of the car. It was the man, standing in the middle of the road, looking directly at me with his empty eyes. I stepped on the accelerator, trying to escape, but the car skidded on the gravel road. I lost control, and the car veered off the track, rolling over several times before coming to a stop. I felt sharp pain all over my body, but the worst was yet to come. When I looked through the broken windshield, I saw the man standing beside the overturned car, still watching me with those expressionless eyes. I tried to move, but I was trapped. He approached slowly, each step resounding like a death drum. My heart was pounding frantically as he crouched beside the window, his eyes piercing me. He reached out, and with a quick and unexpected movement, everything went dark. The last thing I heard was the sound of his slow, controlled breathing. I never knew who he was or what he wanted, but my life ended there, in the solitude of the deserted road, watched by a stranger whose empty gaze would be the last thing I would see.